have your thing up somewhere else here. Oh, we're on.
Yeah, we still need the music.
Oh, yeah, there we are.
Is it implied consent that aren't you supposed to tell us that we're on? Or is this just implied consent?
You're on.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brooks Show.
All right. Welcome, everybody, on this Sunday afternoon, at least afternoon here in beautiful Puerto Rico. I'm going to be an hour ahead of everybody starting next week, I think, or an hour ahead of the East Coast. You guys go on this thing called daylight saving time. We don't believe in that in Puerto Rico, so no daylight saving time in Puerto Rico. So we go 4 hours from the West Coast and an hour from the East Coast. We're not streaming on Facebook because in an effort to weed out Russian bots and Iranian bots and who knows who else's bots they're trying to weed out, my move to Puerto Rico has triggered some panic at Facebook that my account might be being used by said bots, and I've been banned from my own page. I can't post anything to my own page on Facebook. I think my admins can post to my page, but I, the owner of the page, cannot post until I confirm my whereabouts, that I am really in Puerto Rico. It's not just a bot who's in Puerto Rico. I am in Puerto Rico. But when you go to the help page at Facebook and try to figure out how to confirm that I'm in Puerto Rico, it's like one of those manuals on how to, you get this furniture in the mail and they give you the instruction manual on how to assemble it. It's like useless. I have no clue how to use it. I have no clue how to confirm that I indeed am Yaron Brook, the owner of the page, and I do live in Puerto Rico. So for now, I can't stream on Facebook. I'm trying. Hopefully in the next few days, weeks, we will solve the problem and Facebook will once again recognize. My guess is as soon as the election's over, my account will be opened up again and free. So this is pre-election Facebook hysteria. All right. Today we've got our monthly hangout. So we've got, let's see, 5. We might be joined by more, but right now 5 of my most significant supporters of the Yaron Brook Show. And they're going to ask me questions. We are also going to take super chat questions. And remember, high dollar super chat questions get priority. So will be answered first. Don't forget, as you're listening to the show, don't forget, if you like the show, press the like button wherever you are. Liking is easy. And of course, share. And if you want to become a monthly subscriber to the show, please do so on yaronbrookshow.com/support, as these 5 individuals have already done. All right, so let's get rolling. Jim, we'll start with you.
Hey, Yaron. I would say if you're having trouble confirming that you're a real person to Facebook, turn on your Yaron bot, and it'll know what to do to prove that you're a real person.
Maybe I should become a bot, and maybe that'll increase my influence too, and I could get more followers.
There you go. There you go. Move to Russia.
Know how to make me a bot? Drop me an email. Drop me a note on how to become a bot.
All right. Here's a really, really tough question for you. All right. How has the Ayn Rand Institute changed since you joined? First, when did you join?
So I became officially CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm aging myself. This is terrible. Exactly in January, it'll be 20 years. 20 years. So January 2000, I became the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. I did it remotely. I commuted for about 6 months from Northern California while I was finishing up some teaching responsibilities I had at Santa Clara University. So I was shuffling between the 2 places, spending 2 days in Southern California, a day there, coming back and forth. And I was CEO until January of 2017, and I've been chairman of the board since then. I mean, the Institute is a completely different place. It's very different. It's much bigger. The budget is significantly bigger. It's depending on the year, 4 to 5 times bigger. When I joined, the budget was about 2 million, and it basically grew to somewhere between 8 to 10 million in the first decade, and then it stayed at that level since then at about 8 to 10 million. It's got a lot more people. There were 13 people there when I joined. I think we were 13. I'm not sure how many people are there now, but it's over 30, and at the peak we were over 50. At the time, most of what I'd say the number one program of the Institute was the essay contest, which were already huge successes and became even more so in the following years. The book project, the project that distributes books to high school teachers that want to teach the books, that was launched, I don't know, 2003, 2004. So that was launched under my watch. And that became clearly our biggest project at that point. There were never full-time intellectuals working at the Institute except the CEO, which was Michael Berliner before my time. My first hire, I think, in late 2000, fall of 2000, was Onkar Gate as chief philosophy officer. And then we expanded beyond that, bringing in ultimately, Ilan was working there, but not as an intellectual. We trained him to become an intellectual. Over the years, we brought in Alex Epstein, who worked at the Institute for like 8 years, Don Watkins, who worked for the Institute for 10 years, I think, Keith Lockitch, who's there now, Aaron Smith, who's there, and others who have since are still there and departed and moved around. So we built up a whole intellectual team at the Institute. We used to have an Objectivist Graduate Center that was kind of fading. We established an Objectivist Academic Center, which is thriving right now. And many of you can attend the Objectivist Academic Center as both as students, but also as auditors. You have to pay tuition to be an auditor, but it's phenomenal. I mean, it really is a phenomenal program. So, but that's doing really, really well right now. So that's Objectivist Academic Center that didn't exist really. We went through a phase of writing a lot of op-eds, doing a lot of television. That had been done somewhat at the Institute in the 90s, but in the 2000s was done a lot more of. Today is done a lot less of. So it's, things have really grown, changed, developed. The archives has become a much more substantial place, much better organized and run more professionally. I'm sure I'm missing like 23 other things, but basically much bigger, much more active, much more involved. And a lot of that was made possible by just more aggressive fundraising and managing to convince some pretty substantial contributors to support the Institute.
That's excellent, and that's a pretty significant change, as I expected there might be. Tough question. What would you say has been the biggest impact of the ARI?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to, we always struggle with how do we measure, right? Atlas Shrugged book sales peaked in 2009. To a large extent, I think, because of the efforts of the Ayn Rand Institute, its existence throughout all those years, keeping the book at the forefront. And when the Tea Party hit, really, really making the case that Atlas Shrugged was the book. We got help from the Tea Party. We got help from the Wall Street Journal that ran some op-eds about Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged sold 500,000 copies in 2009, by far the best year ever. And it stayed very, very high through 2013. So book sales over the last 20 years have been, off the charts as compared to the previous 20 years. So that would be certainly one measure. I'd say the familiarity of people with Ayn Rand, the prevalence of Ayn Rand. I take it as a point of pride that Paul Krugman feels the need to attack Ayn Rand every like 3-4 months. because I think that means that he feels that she's a force in the culture. And I don't think she'd be as big of a force in the culture if not for the Institute and what it's been doing for the last, since it was founded in 1995. So it's, 30, am I getting my math right? Yeah, 35 years ago. So, so that's a significant thing. The enemy knows who we are. And it's just out there among intellectuals. I mean, I've mentioned this before. I think that Douglas Murray knew who I was and knew who the Iron Man Institute was before we ever met. This podcast that I'm doing, this Lex Friedman podcast that I did a podcast with, knew all about it. And I think was introduced to Ayn Rand through one of the Ayn Rand Institute programs when he was in high school. I meet people all the time who tell me they've read Ayn Rand in high school because of one of our, ultimately because of one of our programs, or that wrote an essay, whether they sent it in or not. Some people write the essay and never send it in because they're not confident enough with the quality of the essay. So I think millions of people know about Ayn Rand that wouldn't because of the Ayn Rand Institute efforts. Now, that hasn't yet had culture-wide impact. That hasn't led to a huge change in the culture. Quite the contrary, the culture continues to deteriorate. But if you'd asked me 20 years ago, would we have, I'd probably say no, too soon. It's going to take a lot longer than that. I think objectivism is increasing. The movement is growing. The influence is growing, but the culture is deteriorating. And we're not going to stop the culture from deteriorating for a while. It's still going to take quite a long time before that actually happens. But I do think I am, really excited by the fact that the internet, YouTube, these kind of shows, but putting all of Len Peikoff stuff on YouTube and getting all of Ayn Rand stuff on YouTube and launching and Ayn Rand Campus, Ayn Rand University, Ayn Rand Campus, and is a huge step towards, dramatically multiplying the impact that we have, because the internet allows you to expand your audience in such a dramatic, exponential fashion. So when the time comes, it could go like this. It could skyrocket the exposure to her, the interest in her ideas. We just have to be ready for when the right cultural combination comes together in our activities to see that exponential growth, but it will happen.
Yeah, and I think that'll be marked by a sudden massive increase in inquiries, media inquiries of people wanting a guest to come on and comment for 30 seconds on some topic.
Yep. Yeah, somebody's asking about the Lex Friedman video. When is it coming out? I don't know. I mean, he came to LA, filmed a bunch of videos, and he's releasing them one at a time. It could be in the next couple of days. It could be in 3 weeks. I don't know how he orders them. He hasn't told me, so I have no idea. But I encourage you to watch it because it's inspired. The video is good. I was good, I thought. And he has good questions, and the interaction was really good. And it lasts, Jonathan, you ready for this? 3 hours. It was a 3-hour interview. So you'll have a 3-hour show, not you're on book show, but you're on screen for 3 hours. And you know what? It was going so well, we could have done another couple of hours easily because the rapport was there. I think he had another interview after me. So otherwise, I think we would have kept going. And hopefully next time I'm in Boston, if he's still in Boston, because he's talking about moving to Austin, Texas, then I'll do another 3 hours with him next time I'm in Boston. So I'm excited in getting that video out, primarily because I think a lot of people who've never heard of me will see it. Maybe a lot of people who haven't heard of Ayn Rand will see it, and people will be reminded by it. That'll be exciting. All right, Jennifer.
We recently talked about how a place like the Garden of Eden would not be good for humans because humans have to put forth effort to accomplish things. But sometimes that effort can be a struggle, which can be unpleasant or even painful. So how would you explain the difference between that and the Gordon or the Peterson type idea that suffering is important somehow?
Well, I think it's not so much the suffering. So the problem with the Garden of Eden is that human beings in the Garden of Eden are completely passive. They don't use their minds. They don't think. They don't have to be productive. They don't have to act. They're just there. they take care of the garden, but it's not even clear what that means, right? Taking care of the garden, because, you know, God's creature. I mean, the snakes can talk. I'm not sure they need taking care of. So it's this passive animalistic existence. And that's what makes it bad. It's human beings and it's animals, right? It's what we would be if we were completely determined and everything was encoded and God provided us just with stuff and we didn't, food, because we didn't want any other stuff. And so we value less. So there's no happiness possible. There's no values possible. So it's not about the struggle, and so it's about values. So the wonder of human life is not the pain and suffering, and which is what, Jordan Peterson that's the focus. That's the essence of human life. No, the essence of human life is a striving for values. It's a striving for life. It's a striving for living the best life that you can live. And that striving is fun. That striving is it's fun. It's interesting. It's exciting. It's thrilling. It gives purpose to your life. It makes life interesting. It's what life is. It's meaning. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about meaning, but he doesn't get that it's exactly that striving for values. That's what gives you meaning. Right? It's your values that give you meaning. So, and values means that you act to gain or keep. So you have to act. So the action, Jordan views it as you're going to die. That's horrible. You know you're going to die. You know it's horrible. So now your entire existence is a struggle to delay death. But it's the opposite. You know that, in a sense, you're alive. What a miracle. And the whole point is to live well. That's what survival really means. And that involves embracing life, and that involves values, and that involves doing interesting, fun things, exciting things, stimulating things, using your mind effectively. And that's good. That's good is the wrong word, but that's where the meaning comes from. So there's pain and suffering don't mean anything in that sense, right? I hate it when I show my ignorance of the novels, but I just can't remember who said what when. I think it was Howard Roark who said the pain only goes so deep, right?
That's right.
Yeah, in the Fountainhead. The pain only goes so deep. The struggle is only so. When Reardon makes to the line and it discovers written steel and has done it, all those hours of struggling, of pain, of suffering, of physical pain, of sleepless nights, that's gone. It doesn't matter. It's insignificant in the big picture of things. So for Jordan Peterson, that is the essence. And the whole point of life is to overcome it. No, the whole point of life is to attain your values. And therefore, if you attain them, then the pain and suffering are insignificant. It's only when you mire yourself in pain and suffering, because you can't attain your values, or your values are anti-life, that the pain and suffering become the focus of your life, and then it's miserable.
Thank you.
Sure. Darius.
Thanks, Yaron. Good to see everyone. So, gosh, where to start? Let me start with this one. So, Yaron, in a laissez-faire society, what would be the solution to solving sewage and human waste and trash disposal?
Well, trash disposal, I think, is relatively simple, because you could easily imagine competition in trash disposal, and you can have different companies. It might not be as efficient, because there would be overlapping routes, and therefore it might not be efficient, but I'm sure they would solve the problem in ways that we can't imagine. So that, I think, is fairly simple. You just have, even today, I'm contracted in California with a private company to pick up my garbage. Now, I think I only have one option of one company, Waste Management. But you could imagine that in a laissez-faire capitalist economy, you know, some guy with a truck would say, hey, I'll come by, pick up your garbage and go take it to the dump. And I'll compete with Waste Management, and he builds a little business and maybe does it that way. I also think that, I mean, the whole issue of real estate, when there's no zoning, when there's real laissez-faire, is interesting, right? How that plays out. And it's really hard to imagine. But for example, when I'm in California, I live in this very large gated community that is not incorporated into any town. It basically runs itself. It's got a board of directors, we elect, we pass certain fee to control everything. Now you could imagine, so it's a private contract, it's private. This thing actually pays, I think, the police force from the adjoining town to come in and do like speed traps and things like that, right? So to police the streets. Of course, if there's a murder, they have jurisdiction, but if there's just for other stuff. So you could imagine that much of development would be a developer develops an area. It is now, not incorporated as a town. It doesn't have the power of government, but has more contractual powers that have to do with maintaining the property and maybe contracting with an outside contractor to pick up the garbage. And I think ultimately that's how you deal with sewage. So sewage, the challenge with sewage is infrastructure, right? You can only dig the hole in the street so many times and put the sewage into the building. And I think what happens there is that contractors, when they build the building, developers, in other words, when they build the building, sign up, basically contract, long-term contracts with particularly sewage companies in order to do this. And sewage companies have an incentive to build kind of the main infrastructure in the big streets. And then the pipes leading to it, there might be some competition around that. They might be, maybe there's more than one sewage running down big streets. I don't know. So I think that the way real estate becomes developed changes. And of course, the transition is going to be a little painful from where we are today to that. Getting rid of zoning, getting rid of government control of all those things. I mean, you could say the same thing about electricity. Are we going to have multiple lines running around? Well, yeah, maybe. Maybe they'd be underground, but maybe you'd have multiple lines and you could hook up your house and the neighbor could hook up to another company. We do that with cable. We do that with other things. And part of the issue is, and I know this sounds like a cop-out, but it's reality, that we don't know, right? Markets are beautiful things. And markets would come up with solutions that we don't know. I mean, it might turn out that for some buildings, having their own, thing that takes bad water and turns it into good water is cheaper than running it through the sewage system. I don't know. Maybe there'd be real competition for producing those kind of things. And developers would install them into the buildings and they'd recycle the water in some way. Who knows, right? So all I know is entrepreneurs will come up with solutions. And the worst case scenario is you have what we have today. You have a monopoly provider that provides, and if they raise the price too high, then we figure out alternatives.
And I think that the way that we pay for access to the internet illustrates just how reasonable this could be. If you think about it, when you pay your local cable company or whoever, you are in effect paying for access to the whole world, even though you're not directly paying everyone in the world who has a web server.
Yeah, so for example, different companies own the fiber optics that goes across oceans and across the country. Different companies actually own the hubs, and then a different company owns the last mile. Now, part of that is a product of regulation. So who knows, again, what would happen in a free market. But the other thing about the internet, which I think is really interesting, is we started out with modems over telephone wires. And for a while, we thought that was the only way, right? So there was a monopolistic power because they provided the phone line into your home. So there was only one provider. And then it turned out, wait a minute, we can actually get internet through our cable a television cable that we used to get our cable stuff, and that was, whoa, okay, so now there are two providers, two wires into the house. I can choose between two. And then it turns out that you could get fiber from a phone company, like fiber's running into the house, like AT&T has fiber some places. But then there's also, you can get satellite through DirecTV, and in other places. So one of the things that would happen with electricity, for example, is you'd get innovation, right? All kinds of new ways to deliver electricity that we couldn't imagine. Is there any reason we couldn't get the electricity through phone wires? I don't know what the physics are. Maybe the physics are that it's impossible, but I don't know.
Right, and you could look at something. You could look at something like sewage treatment and say that the downstream receiver could subcontract and find the best deal of who can process it. I mean, there are lots of ways to do this free market.
Yep.
Even if nuclear was deregulated, you could imagine all sorts of innovations and solutions to the sewage.
Yeah, because then power becomes so cheap. If nuclear is deregulated and becomes abundant, then power becomes very cheap, and once energy becomes very cheap, you can all kinds of solutions emerge. Jonathan, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Yaron, I remember, I think when Wi-Fi first started to come into existence, there was some talk in some of these West Coast cities about government setting up a Wi-Fi service because, it had to provide it, and we couldn't just count on these, monopolists. And of course, now all those services have become so cheap and so easy, efficient that you think about, in the name of the public good, the amount of money that could have been spent in those types of public boondoggles.
Absolutely. And think about now we're getting 5G on our phones, which is going to be super fast. And then there's 6G, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, we get 6G. At the point of 6G, basically you don't need, it's fiber through the air. You're getting the bandwidth we're using right now through on your phone, every facility. You won't have, the fiber will be competing with your phone, with the cell phone companies for. So once you free up a market, the possibilities are endless. And it's very difficult, unfortunately, for people to imagine it. And we don't have the parallel universe, I always refer to that, of where there's a free market and we can see how they do it over there. But, I wish we did, or I wish there was a country somewhere where we could point to. All right, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, you're just inspiring me. I'm switching up my question now at the last minute. I was going to ask you something stupid inside baseball, gossipy about objectivism. But I want to ask you something much more positive, inspired by what you just said, and that is this notion of really wealth creation. And I talked about this on the Ayn Rand Center UK podcast a couple of weeks ago, that, of course, they didn't, they're from, the Europe, they didn't know what Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous was, but you remember Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? Yep. And in the 80s, only very rich people had a television in their bathtub. Can you remember that? Yep. It was something that if you had a TV in your bathtub built in, it was only the most extravagant. And, the point I was making is now we all have that technology. We have it even in a way, as you said, Yaron, you couldn't imagine. I mean, maybe you could imagine everyone having a TV, but never having an iPhone with every video ever created, every TV show ever created. So in all this talk about in all this talk about income inequality and politics, Yaron, how do you make the distinction between, people aren't making money or they're not making any more money, as against look at the wealth they now enjoy, the wealth that you can't quantify? I mean, it's me every day.
It truly is. I mean, it's people look, and economists in particular, only look at the amount of money we have in the bank, right? And the assets we hold. And they value those assets for the dollar amount you paid for them. And yet the actual wealth that you possess far exceeds that, because the value your iPhone represents, the value fiber into the home represents, the value that technology represents is not captured in the amount of money I paid for it, because the value is so much more than that. So that we are so much richer, and this includes the poor, who tend to have smartphones, who tend to have automobiles, who tend to have things like air conditioning. And just think about 50 years ago, air conditioning was pretty rare outside of a few places that were very, very hot. But yet all those things enhance human life, enhance standard of living, enhance quality of life dramatically. But economists can't measure them. They can't capture the value of them. So they're never counted. Even when you look at the inequality numbers, which I think are all bogus, and I think the whole inequality debate is irrelevant to anything, really. But what's interesting is, if you look at what people call consumption inequality, that is the difference between what poor people spend on consumption, on stuff, and what rich people spend on stuff. That shrinks. It hasn't gone up. Rich people might be worth more and maybe earn more, but they don't spend more. Because you know what? After that first private jet, you would know, Jonathan, you don't need two, right?
My father used to say you can only wear one pair of pants in the morning.
Exactly. And I always say, compare me to Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates is, I don't know, 10,000 times richer than me, or I don't know the exact number. I should make the calculation one day. But he drives a car, and I drive a car. Now his car's probably nicer, but mine has leather. It's not bad, right? And it gets me to where I need to go. And in most places, at about the same time that Bill Gates' car would get him there, because traffic and everything, he's not driving faster than I am. So he's at the very tiny little bit of margin, a little bit more comfortable than me. I've got a nice house. He's got a nice house. Now, his is nicer, bigger, more electronically fancy. But how much better is it? In terms of utility to your life, it's not a lot. It's not. How much would I give to have Bill Gates' house? Not much, right?
Trampoline room.
Take somebody poor. Even somebody poor in America today typically has a house. They're protected from the weather. They have heating. They typically have air conditioning. They have a car. So don't use me, because I'm probably in the higher, upper middle class, or my wife likes to call it lower rich. I don't know what category that is. But if you take somebody poor, they have all these things, right? They can get to work with a car. They live in a house. They have a television. Theirs might be 55 inches. Bill Gates's might have the 100-inch one that costs $80,000. But you know what? Both of their Netflix subscriptions cost exactly the same. Exactly the same, right? So it's not, so yes, his television is bigger, his sound system is better, but they're watching the same movie, the same TV shows at the same cost. And you go through all these things. Yeah, Bill Gates eats at nicer restaurants more frequently, maybe, who knows? I probably eat at more fancy restaurants than Bill Gates, just because it's my hobby and not his. But everybody in America, we've got an obesity crisis because everybody's eating. Nobody's starving in America. We're eating. And then, Bill Gates flies on a private jet. If he wants to go from Seattle to New York, he gets on his private jet and goes. And if I want to go from Puerto Rico to New York, I get on a private jet and fly there. I happen to share my private jet with about 300 other people. It's still a private jet. It still gets me to New York. It's still incredibly convenient. They're regular flights. And for the most part, it's affordable to almost everybody in the country. That think about airplane travel, Jonathan, 40, 50 years ago.
Sure.
How many people could afford it? Now, almost everybody, we're not traveling right now, but generally, people are traveling all over the place. And complaining, of course, but fine.
Well, I'll just quickly say, I don't want to monopolize the time, but they always talk about inflation being kind of a stealth tax. You don't really see it. And strangely, it seems like often wealth creation is like that as well, because we've become so accustomed to it that, and I'll quickly tell an anecdote. I replaced a car, like a Jeep Cherokee that we had about 11 years. And that same level Jeep in 11 years is so much better. There's all these systems now that 11 years ago, backup systems and camera systems, that it's the same model. And that's wealth creation. It's become so commonplace now you have to stop and just marvel at it once in a while.
And it's not more
It's
expensive.
amazing.
It's not in and of itself. It's not more expensive. It's about the same cost.
Yes.
As it was back then, adjusted for inflation. And yeah, I mean, another way to think about this, since you brought up inflation, is think of how much deflation in the sense of pricing going down, which is not prices. If we had a rational, free market monetary solution, prices would be going down because quality. If you control for quality, you're buying the same car, but the car is so much better, so it's really cheaper. If you buy a computer now and the computer 20 years ago, same cost, but the computer is so much better. So in a sense, per unit of utility, prices have gone down dramatically. And indeed, when you look at charts of costs of things over the last 20, 30 years, to a large extent because of technology and China and trade, global trade, prices of almost every good have gone dramatically down. Except the things that government touches. Housing, healthcare, education.
And
they've gone dramatically up.
Yeah, and arguably automobile prices should be going down too if they were so heavily regulated.
Absolutely. And air travel would be cheaper, and all these things would be cheaper and faster and more convenient and better. So, but I like that stealth. In a sense, the increases in our standard of living are stealth. We don't actually, and this is why, and this is an important psychological point in my view. It explains a lot of what's going on in America. It's why people so easily buy into the rhetoric of inequality. It's why people believe they're worse off. So everybody believes now that their wages are lower than they were 30 years ago. They believe that the standard of living is lower than it was 30 years ago. They believe that crime is higher than it was 30 years ago. They believe generally life is much worse in every dimension than it was 30 years ago, and that none of that is true. But if you say it to them often enough, and since the improvements are not easily monetized, and they're stealth, as Jonathan mentioned, they're stealth improvements, it's easy to convince them. And Trump did it in 2016. I think and the left has been doing it for 12 years. I mean, one of my big objections to Trump is that he's picked up on all the left's talking points, right? This talking point that the middle class and the working class are worse off than they used to be is a leftist talking point that Trump has picked up on. But it's just not true. But because of all these things are stealth, it's easy to convince the people that it's true because they don't think. That's the bottom line. They don't think, and they don't think about it in those terms. They don't think of how wonderful it is to have Zoom, right? And be able to communicate with people, even during a pandemic. They just take Zoom for granted. They take their computer for granted. They take their Netflix for granted. They take all these things for granted.
Every day I have more respect and understanding why Rand felt it's so important to study history.
Yep.
And why that was such a focus of hers. And certainly, thanks, Yaron. Great response.
Yeah. All right, Ori.
Cool. Well, I just need to start off by thanking you, because over the last couple of years, discovering objectivism has completely, irrevocably changed my life. And you are the reason I discovered objectivism, so thank you.
That's great. That's why I do this.
Cool. So my question is, the other day I was looking on YouTube. I was just watching random YouTube videos, and for some reason I ended up watching Leonard Peacock's 86th birthday anniversary, or 86th birthday. And in the video they flashed
87 actually 87.
No. Well, I first watched the
86 one. Okay.
And then I watched the 86 one. Okay. And they flashed on the screen this painting, and it's a painting of a woman who looks like she's in like a space station looking at Earth, and it's in Carl Barney's home.
Yeah.
Who painted that? How can I get a print of that?
I have a feeling there are prints available, not on that size, not on that scale, but there are prints available through Quint Cortez Gallery.
What's it called?
Quint, Quent Cordair, Cordair.
Okay.
Did I spell that right? I think I spelled that right. His gallery, Brian Lawson is the name of the artist. Same artist who painted. I get my left and right wrong. That one, that painting over there. There, that one. I hate this mirror thing. They might have a poster of it at Quincodes. If not, you could call them up and ask them, because they work. Brian Lawson works, exclusively through them.
I just tossed a link in the chat.
Awesome.
Great. All right, let's do some super chat questions. Yeah, I'm encouraging super chat questions. So far, they've been kind of low dollar ones. Come on, guys. I have to make a living here. All right. Referring to my previous Amazon question, I agree that antitrust law shouldn't exist. However, how do you respond to the idea of purposefully pricing other businesses into bankruptcy and then raising prices once succeeding? Well, I don't think that is a sustainable business model. Amazon I don't think that's what actually Amazon does. I don't know that there's proof that Amazon has done that in a sense of increasing prices, getting the competition out, and then decreasing the prices again. I haven't seen any evidence of that happening, because it's not a viable business option. I mean, imagine you do that constantly because you've got different products, and then when do you ever make money? Now, what Amazon has done is that it is for years and years and years lost money in order to achieve economies of scale, in order to achieve the kind of distribution network. And it's probably raised some prices a little bit, but it wasn't so much to drive competitors out. The goal was net a negative. It's a wrong way to look at business. The goal was a positive. And the positive is to build the kind of scale that makes it possible for them to continue to offer the cheap prices. So I haven't seen any studies showing that prices at Amazon have gone up dramatically. Because, even though Amazon has become profitable, even on its retail stuff, and the reason is that as Amazon achieved scale, it could dramatically drive down its cost structure. So it could continuously offer you stuff that the competitors couldn't, even though it wasn't underpricing anymore. It was basically, because of its scale, it was still making money, even though it was pricing it very low. Thanks for the support. Really, really appreciate it. So I have no problem with that business practice. I think it's great. And if you can get away with it, it's great. But let me tell you a story of how that can backfire. True story. And this is a story, I think this is a story of Dow Chemical. In an era which was about as close to laissez-faire capitalism that we've ever had in the early part of the 20th century in America. And Dow was struggling against a cartel of chemical manufacturers in Germany. And what the chemical, and there's actually multiple stories here, because they kept having different battles over different chemicals. But one of the battles is very relevant here. I can't remember the name of the chemical, but the Germans wanted to dominate the US market, and they wanted to drive Dow out of existence. So they basically dropped the price in the United States dramatically below the market price, and basically became the 100% supplier of the good in the United States, and drove Dow completely out of the market. Now, they had to take quite a loss for doing this, because we're talking about large volumes and very popular chemicals. So they had to take quite a loss. Now, to compensate themselves for this loss, they raised prices in Germany, because they knew that in Germany, they were the only producers in mainland Europe of these chemicals, and they could raise prices in Germany. What did Dow do? He started buying the chemical from the Germans in America, shipping it to Europe, and underpricing their price in Europe for it. Now, today, you couldn't do that because of regulations. I mean, just imagine. I mean, every petrochemical shipment probably has to be delayed and paperwork and all this stuff. But back then, he just did it. And he basically forced the Germans to normalize prices, and he competed with them in the United States. And ultimately, he had a better process, so he could undercut their prices in the US and came to dominate the US market, right? So there are all kinds of ways in which in a market economy, such behavior is penalized. I mean, capital markets would penalize it because at some point, if a company loses money and doesn't have a plan to make it one day, because it keeps having to underprice its competitors, then capital markets will stop funding that company. And remember, the company has to be funded by somebody. If not from profits, it has to raise capital either through debt or through equity. So if the capital markets are saying, wait a minute, where's the profit? You keep having to underprice your competitors. It's not a business model that's sustainable and never has been. I don't know of a single industry. Now, again, you can do it for a while, but it doesn't, it's not sustainable.
Unless you have government subsidies in force.
Yes, so government protection from competition, because competitors will arise. Every time you raise those prices, and you don't just raise them to normal, right? In order to compensate for the losses you had in the past, you have to raise them above normal. As soon as you raise them above normal, another competitor is going to enter, particularly if the barriers to entry, like with Amazon, are fairly low. I mean, look at Walmart. Walmart is just, would love to see Amazon raise prices because Walmart is moving heavily into online sales, and Walmart is a logistics giant. It doesn't have to build warehouses. It's got stores everywhere. They could deliver to your home much easier than Amazon. And that's what they want to do, right? They want to be a direct competitor to Amazon. So they can't wait for Amazon to lower prices to get some of the competitors out so they can jump in as soon as Amazon raises prices and undermine them. Competitive markets don't work like they work like your professors taught you on a blackboard. The dynamism, the innovation, the new business models, the competition, it doesn't work like what was on the blackboard, what your professors taught you. It's so much more complex than that. Let's see. I want to remind everybody, I'll do a few more Super Chat questions in a second. I want to remind everybody that on Tuesday, the show on Tuesday, we're going to have a match on the Super Chat. Every dollar you contribute on the Super Chat on Tuesday will be matched up to $1,000. So it's double the one we did last time. So this time we can raise $2,000 in one Super Chat. So anybody who can write $50, $100 checks, that'd be fantastic. If we can get up to if we can utilize the entire $1,000 match, that'll be really, really good. So that'll be Tuesday. It'll be 5 p.m. East Coast. No, 5 p.m. Pacific time. So 8 p.m. East Coast time. All right. What do you think of the idea that Biden can't legally be president because he could be blackmailed over Hunter, while Trump has already shown he can't be blackmailed? How do we know that Trump isn't blackmailed? How do we know that? Right? I mean, we don't know that. Maybe he's super friendly to Putin because he's being blackmailed. Now, it's arbitrary because we don't have any evidence one way or the other. But we don't have any evidence that Biden can be blackmailed or will be blackmailed or is being blackmailed. And I mean, Trump has an unbelievably cozy relationship with Putin and with the Saudis, has never disclosed his taxes, has never told us where some of the money for some of his projects has come from. I don't know that he can't be blackmailed. I mean, I'm not saying he is. I just don't know. So, and I actually, when he was first elected in 2016, I actually speculated that he owed the Russians and he owed the Saudis quite a bit through his relationship with Deutsche Bank. And I think if he doesn't win, and we ultimately learn about his finances, I think it's going to be really interesting. Looking back, really interesting. And look, we know that Trump is willing to put pressure on foreign governments in order to attain political goals. I mean, that's what he was almost impeached for. I mean, there used to be a time where that kind of behavior would get you in real trouble in America. Now, you know, the partisan politics, you get impeached, but nothing really happens. And your own party cheers you on, and they vote for you to run again. We know he behaves despicably in these contexts. So I'm not sure why you think Biden would be worse in this context. I mean, he might be. I'm not saying he won't be. He might be. And maybe they can blackmail him. Maybe we don't know everything. But I'm not worried. The one thing I'm not worried about a Biden administration is the Biden being blackmailed. I'm worried about the public option for Obamacare. I'm worried about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of deficit. I'm worried about mini Green New Deal. I'm worried about regulations up the kazoo. I'm worried about rising taxes. I'm worried about a lot of things. I'm not that worried about blackmail. I mean, maybe I should be, but I'm not. You want to regularly encounter anti-rational positions as I speak to people. I really believed that we had abandoned the anti-rational beliefs, like witch hunts, for example, but people still behave the same. Yes. I mean, what we haven't eradicated is irrationality. And the only way we've eradicated certain forms of mysticism. People are much more secular now. But we haven't eradicated the phenomena of irrationality. We haven't eradicated the phenomena of mysticism. It's still there. America's still quite religious. And as long as people are mystical, they're irrational. And they can compartmentalize to an extent, but only to an extent, until we actually have people who are rational, who are using their minds, not just part of the time, not just at work, not just between 9 to 5, but are using their minds, their rational minds, in dealing with every aspect of their life. You will still encounter that irrationality. You will still encounter, variations of the witch hunt, variation of that kind of mindless mysticism. All right, here is a inside baseball question. I don't know if I'm going to answer it, but anyway, since it was asked with dollars associated with it. Carl Barney's endgame seems to be encouraging your retirement as chairman. Yeah. Are you confident you still have enough support on the board to survive any attempt? Can you confirm no plans to retire? Yes, I can confirm no plans to retire, no plans to be retired, no plans to, unless something dramatic happens at some point, somewhere, sometime, nobody's retiring me from the board of the Ayn Rand Institute. So, I wish I could tell you more, but I'm not going to. So, I'm tempted, but I shouldn't. Too much inside the park. Really, for the most part, irrelevant to you guys. Relevant to me because it's a major headache and a major hassle, but irrelevant to you guys. So, I'm going to stay away from it. All right, Jim.
Yeah, somebody even asked me about that stuff, and I'm like, not really interested. Keep being awesome. You're on. Keep being you. All right, my next question. Ayn Rand, like a lot of people in her time, had a deep fascination with the ancient Greek world. And to put a more point on it, I think we really mean ancient Athens, the ancient Athenian Empire. And kind of a sliver about half a century in length that really was its golden era of philosophy and art and culture. What would you say, and I know this is difficult for lack of evidence, but what would you say are some of the cultural differences between that period of time in ancient Greece and let's say in ancient Athens versus contemporary America or in American history as well?
It's a great question. And I'll refer you, as I often do, to a lecture by Leonard Peikoff. I'll answer the question as well, but I'll also refer you to a lecture by Leonard Peikoff that I'm sure is available somewhere about why ancient Greece is his favorite civilization. I'm one of the things I've done in my life that I'm proud of is there was a period in time when really throughout my tenure at the Institute, where I hired Leonard Peikoff to do courses and lectures and stuff. And, I hired him to do philosophy through induction. It was the first time I'd ever done a video conference. It was over the video. You sat and you watched Leonard on a television screen. And this is in the mid to late 90s. This was early technology. It cost us a fortune to do. And it was great. And he did philosophy through induction. Well, one of the things I did is in 1997, I organized a Greek island cruise with a bunch of objectivist intellectuals, including Leonard Peikoff, and there will probably be about 60, 70 attendees. And they would lecture on the boat, on the cruise. Now, what people remember from that cruise was that the cruise ship sucked. That it really was not a very nice cruise ship. We tried to keep this cheap. We didn't realize objectivists had money in those days. We thought all objectivists were cheap. Certainly, I was poor in those days, so I didn't know. So we did it in a very economy, and people with a lot of money came, and they were disappointed in the facilities. But Leonard gave this lecture on why ancient Greece, as we're going, we did an event in Athens. I got to walk with Leonard Peikoff in places and toast Aristotle at dinner. And so it was an amazing trip. Anyway, I highly recommend that talk by Leonard about what made Greek special and why it's his favorite civilization. And I think,
at the end of the speech, you all guys all raise a glass at the end and have a toast.
Where? Sorry, I missed that.
I'm sorry. I believe listening to that speech at the end, there's a glass and a toast raised.
I think that's right. And there were, during the whole time in Greece, we raised several glasses, I think. But yes, the talk was very moving, very emotional, and very powerful. What was I going? Yes, Greece. The thing that makes Greeks unique is how intellectual the culture was. Now, remember, when we talk about Greek culture, we're talking about men. We're talking about free men, right? So slaves didn't have much of a culture, and women didn't participate much. But apart from that, the culture was, phenomenal. You had a deep appreciation for the arts, drama, poetry. You had a deep appreciation for sculpture, decoration, painting, although not many paintings from that era survived. Architecture. There was just a deep appreciation for scientists, for thinking, for progress, for philosophers, right? Remember, Socrates walks around town debating people. Imagine. Today they think you were some crazy guy, some nut who's off his meds, engaging people in philosophical discussion. Who the hell does that? We go to school to study, and we get, professors telling us what, there's no. So a deep respect for reason, a deep respect for thinking, but a deep respect for beauty and art, and a respect, admiration, and for human beings, mind and body. It was a mind and body. It was an integrated culture, a culture of integrated mind and body. So while the Greeks respected the intellect and loved the intellect, they also respected beauty in body, right? So athletes were heroes, and successful athletes were heroes. And, I don't know how many people know this, but the Olympics, the athletes competed nude. They don't wear anything. So there's even a positive, a very pre-Christian positive attitude to the human body, to nudity, to sexuality. So even in terms of sex, I think there's a sense in which they were more open, more, they viewed it as part of life. It wasn't this thing that, somehow initiates original sin and is sinful and bad. So it's a civilization of mind-body integration, real integration of knowledge, admiration of human beings, admiration of heroes, admiration of beauty. And, you walked in a Greek city, sculptures, and not just Athens. I mean, I've been to Ephesus, which is probably the best preserved ancient Greek ruins. And it's just magnificent. And the sculptures everywhere, everything is sculptures and everything is decorated. And it's alive. It's alive in a way that I don't think our civilization is. We suffer so, I don't think almost anybody appreciates the extent to which Christianity is destructive to the human spirit and destructive to civilization, and how much we've got to overcome in overcoming original sin, Garden of Eden, all these religious mythologies that what's his name, Jordan Peterson celebrates, and we should condemn and we should move on from. So yeah, Greece was amazing.
I get the impression that a lot of what we think of as public works of creations of public baths and things in ancient Greece and ancient Rome were largely privately funded by large donors.
They could have been. I don't know enough of the history, but it wasn't a laissez-faire place, but it was a place of democracy in the sense that of people actually determining their own political fate. And there was a lot of positive, yes, and it was a beginning of a market, and Athens was it was a port, and it was a trading city that became rich through trade. First, maybe not the first, the Phoenicians were probably the first, but they continued the trend towards globalization in the context. Globalization meant trade across the entire Middle East, and even contact with faraway places like India and China existed back then through kind of the Persian Empire. So, but the real expression of Greece is through its art and through its philosophy.
I think we all agree that the Olympics should be done naked now.
I'm not sure we all agree, but yes, that would be something. That'd
improve the ratings.
Yeah. Jennifer, you're muted.
When Biden was on the debate, he said he wanted to get rid of oil. And do you really think that most people have any understanding of what that would actually mean? That would destroy civilization.
No, and I don't think he meant it. And I'm sure he regretted it as soon as it came out of his mouth, because the fact is that his contributors don't want to end oil. And I'm sure many of his contributors in finance and many contributors might even be in the oil industry. So I'm sure he regretted it immediately. No, people don't understand what it would mean. They have a general sense that if they think about it, it's not that hard. And they should definitely read Alex Epstein's book about the moral case for fossil fuels to see the focal impact of that oil has on all of our lives. But Biden is not anti-oil any more than he's anti-anything. He's trying to figure out what to say to get the base to vote for him and not to alienate independents and Republicans who don't want to vote for Trump. And once in a while he slips into, because he doesn't believe in anything. None of these people do. So he's once in a while he'll slip into something for the base, like, we should go off oil by 2035. And then the independents look at him like he's nuts and he has to backtrack from it. But yeah, I don't think he or anybody else out there has a clue what that actually would mean. It's a floating abstraction in their mind. And I don't think they have any intention of making it a reality.
I'm sure he would start a blue ribbon panel to study the problem.
They'll have a blue ribbon panel to study the problem. They might even pass a law that we will be carbon neutral by 2035. And then in 2030, they'll extend it to 2040. And in 2040, they'll extend it to 2050 because the costs of this are ludicrous. And the cost not just in money, but the cost in human life, the cost in votes, the cost in convenience, the cost in every respect is so ludicrous that they would just fold on it, as they always do. California keeps extending its alternative energy, zero carbon thing into the future. Germany has been doing it constantly all the time, extending it because they can't meet their own deadlines. Nobody who governs actually wants to suffer the political consequences of making that a reality. Promising it is cheap. Executing on it is expensive. Not to say some nut won't do it one day, and we won't let him do it one day, but I still think that they keep walking away from the abyss because they're not quite that nihilistic.
I hope so.
Me too. We all hope so. All right, Darius. Oops, what did I do here?
Thanks. So I'm hoping you can help me reconcile sort of a conflict I discovered when I was filling out my ballot in California. I noticed, there's a handful of things that my initial reaction was yes, like lowering property taxes for people 55 and older, just on the grounds that it's going in the right direction. I like to see property tax eliminated completely. Allowing Uber and Lyft to hire people as independent contractors instead of employees. Yes, because it's a direction I think all companies should be able to do. But then I kind of caught myself falling into the trap of, well, aren't we just giving favors to certain groups? Certain either people 55 and older, or homeowners, yep, or certain companies, certain industries, et cetera. I definitely don't believe in giving favors to groups. So how do I reconcile that? I was hoping you can help me work through that.
I mean, I think it's very difficult. I mean, it's part of what the challenge is in a mixed economy, and it is how to navigate the mixed economy about what makes sense and what's not. I generally don't support tax cuts that are targeted and then are not matched by some kind of spending cut. So, I mean, why should 55-year-olds pay less property taxes if my taxes are going to go up because the state is not going to cut spending and they have to run a balanced budget? So they have to raise my taxes. Now I'm over 55, so maybe I would vote for it, but it's not right. It's not fair, right? So I don't like that they're paying more taxes. I probably wouldn't vote on that one. I would just abstain from that, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's any real evidence that they would actually extend that to all ages.
No. The whole point is they're using altruism to go after a group that seems to be suffering.
Yeah,
it's not clear they are. Even that, but so that's one. The other is, so I'm hesitant with taxes generally because I don't think taxes are that important. I think what's important is spending, right? And I want to see something about cutting spending. But then on AB, what is it? AB 5?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a movement towards freedom. It's not just Uber and Lyft. I think it's more broadly independent contractors. It affects a variety of independent contractors. It doesn't affect all independent contractors, but I don't think it's crafted in a way that only benefits Lyft and Uber. Maybe it is, but I don't think it is. So that one I would definitely vote for because it is moving us in the right direction. Now, if it's clearly crony in a sense that it's helping one or two companies and nobody else, then yeah, I'm with you. I would not vote for it. I would again abstain. So it's hard. And you have to look at it and say, am I sacrificing anybody here by moving us towards what appears to be a little bit more freedom? Is anybody worse off? Right? So tax-wise, in a balanced budget environment, yes. If they're not cutting spending, then everybody else's taxes are going to have to go up and we're worse off. Everybody else is worse off. in a regulatory environment, anytime you're cutting regulations, that's a good thing. Now, if you're cutting regulations in such an obviously crony way as to benefit some people at the expense of others, then it's wrong. And sometimes it's hard to tell. I mean, I often in the ballot initiative said parks on both their houses because I can't tell. And yes and no is bad, right? The problem is so much deeper that these are meaningless. I'm not going to vote on that one, right? And just voted on the ones that I thought had substance. It was clear.
Yeah, that's helpful. I appreciate that.
Sure. All right, Ori.
So there's an article in the Wall Street Journal that mentioned that new businesses are being formed at the fastest rate since 2007. And I'm curious, how much of that do you think is healthy recovery from the pandemic, and how much of that do you think is caused by like Fed stimulus and everything?
That's true. We were seeing the highest. Where'd you read this?
Wall Street Journal.
I'll have to look that up. The highest
rate of new businesses being formed since 2007.
So I wonder what the number is if you net out bankruptcies.
Right, and there's speculation. I think this is what Ari's talking about. There's speculation that a lot of this is driven by people who are like, I'll start a business now and take advantage of stimulus money.
Get PPP. I mean, that's possible. It's not easy to get PPP, particularly now. Most of the money's being spent. My guess is that it's more related to the fact that the economic policies under COVID have driven so many companies bankrupt that it's created opportunities that people are jumping in to take advantage of. Some of that might be funded by the Fed and PPP and other things, but I think it's a market response, partially funded by the government, to the COVID, which was caused to a large extent by government, right? So if hundreds of restaurants are going bankrupt in New York City will ultimately still have to have restaurants. So somebody's going to have to start new restaurants to fill in the gap. So my guess is that net business creation is still going to be way down this year, even with the new business created, but that the new businesses are basically filling in the gaps of the businesses that have gone under. It could also be a play like Donald Trump used to do, right? Donald Trump was very good at, I'll file for bankruptcy on that property, shield all my other assets from it, file bankruptcy over there, let the courts handle it, and I'll take whatever capital I can preserve to invest somewhere else and start a new business over here. And keep every business separate, so when I file for a bankruptcy, they can't come after me. They can't come after my other businesses. So that could be also what's going on, is that the bankruptcies, we're seeing these bankruptcies as a strategic thing where they're pulling capital from the bankrupt company and investing in and starting new companies that basically do the same thing the bankrupt company did before. So it could be just gaming the system.
Yeah, and if you smash enough windows, somebody's going to benefit by having to replace the windows.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yep. All right, Jonathan. You're muted. But it sounded really interesting.
Sorry about that. You've talked in the past about trying somewhat unsuccessfully to short sell Amazon back in the 1990s.
I didn't short sell it. I bought put options.
Bought put options.
Much cheaper.
Is there are there any assets now in the markets, either the stock market or big picture, asset class, that you look at and you think, gee, I'd love to bet against that right now?
Yeah, I mean, if I this is not investment advice. I'm not encouraging anybody to do this. This is just me as a private citizen, not as anything professional. Jonathan is just asking on the Yaron Brook show and so on, right? Yeah, if I could, I would buy a put on the Nasdaq. I would short technology. Not short, because the danger, I can tell you short stories. The danger of a short is because things can go up a huge amount. I would buy put options on some of the technology indexes. I think they are as far from fundamentals as they were in '99, from what I can tell. Now, again, it's hard to call the market, but if I was going to do a bet like that, that's what I would do. And you could buy, for example, one way to do this is to buy value stocks, traditional value stocks, and short technology stocks, or buy a put option on technology stocks. And I think that is a good investment if I had to make one over the next 5 years.
All right.
I think technology stocks, they don't make any sense to me. They didn't make it, they didn't make sense to me in '99. My problem was I was too early. So I bought put options in January '99. I rolled them over in March, and I didn't have any real money. So I stopped, right? And if I'd done it in January 2000, I would have made a fortune. But when I look at the gap, so I have a measure called, I can't remember. Anyway, it's a measure of, I look at the value of bank stocks divided by the value of the S&P 500. And that measure is at the lowest it's ever been since when I started measuring these things, early 90s, right? Lowest it's ever been, right? So in other words, banks are hopeless, never going to be profitable, or profitability is going to be awful. Technology stocks, the future is as rosy as can be. COVID never happened. That's what the pricing says. Now, I don't believe that. That is one or the other, or both are not true, right? If things are rosy and things are going to be super, then banks will do okay. They might not do great, but they'll do okay. And therefore, they will rise relative in a sense of a relative value relative to the S&P. If things are not as good and banks really are in the shit, then the S&P is too expensive. That's my interpretation of the numbers out there. I don't recommend anybody invest based on what I just said. These kind of macro plays are very difficult to call. I've been probably just as wrong as I have been right in the past about these things. I'm pretty confident about it, so you know where my money is. But I wouldn't, and I'm putting clients' money into it, but clients' money into a certain part of that. But clients know what they're getting into, and so on. But it's
the wild card seems to be the Fed, which can continue to inflate stock prices indefinitely.
Well, but it can directly inflate stock prices indefinitely, because ultimately the prices have to be reflected in real goods. And if they're reflected in real goods, you get inflation, and inflation, then you get a steep yield curve. You get long-term rates going up. If you get long-term rates going down, stock prices will come down. You can't defy gravity. That is, if it's truly bubbly, then the bubble has to burst, right? One way or the other, the bubble will burst. So at some point, these things do get settled. I do believe in markets are efficient over time. Not necessarily in any given point in time, but over time, in that they reflect the best available information available to them, irrespective of the games that the Fed plays. But it takes time, and sometimes it's going to be painful. Look, the NASDAQ was irrationally went up, what it was, 90% in 1999. A stock index should never go up 90%. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just indeed, it went down, 60-70% in 2000, 2001. In that era, it went down a lot. So it fixed itself, right? It corrected because reality, the efficient market came back. And a lot of hedge fund guys, a lot of investors withdrew from the market in the late 90s. They said, I remember, I forget
it took 12 years to get back to where it was before.
Yeah, it took it 12 years for the NASDAQ to come back. And a lot of investors, I remember some of the most famous hedge funds investors in history said, I remember in 98, 99, they said, we don't get this market. It doesn't make any sense to us. We're returning capital to our investors and we're retiring. And that is not a good sign when really, really, really smart investors say that, right? So, I think we're in a period not quite exactly like that, but similar to that, because, I understand certain stocks are doing well with COVID, but as an index, I'm skeptical.
Right. There's the FANG carrying up the S&P versus the rest of the S&P, which arguably is staying stationary or going.
But there are a lot of small technology stocks that are going through the roof, not just the big ones.
Yeah.
Not just the big ones. The returns I've seen on some of these stocks are just astronomical, and some of them may be justified if Zoom has a good way to monetize what it's doing, and it has. I don't know, but a lot of it's exaggeration because people get excited about the manifestation of a new technology and they pile into it, and ultimately it gets fixed. So, okay, let's see. All right, we'll go with the high dollar question first, and then I think everybody else's questions were low dollar. Okay. Does the concept of power have any precise meaning in political context? Or is it a blanket evaluation of an overbearing state? Thanks, George. No, it absolutely has a precise meaning. It means their ability to use the gun against you. It means their ability to use force, coercion against you. So political power is force, coercion. Think jail, think a gun, think you have to behave in a particular way. Otherwise, there are severe dramatic consequences that you suffer from. So regulations are a form of political power. Taxation is a form of political power. Everything politicians do ultimately is a reflection of political power. And as the state grows, gets bigger and bigger and bigger, its course of power grows. The extent, the scope of its coercion grows. The magnitude of the coercion grows. So more and more in every aspect of your life, you are coerced by the state. And that's what political power means. And we say politicians are power lusting. That's the power they lust. They lust the power to coerce. They lust the power to control. They lust the power to use force against other people, to run our lives for us. And that's, unfortunately, the essential characteristic of most of our politicians today. All right. Okay. Why should someone invest why should somebody invest time and effort into cultivating their taste in art? Wow, because art is the fuel of the soul. Art is essential for a good life. I mean, if you haven't read the Romantic Manifesto, I'm not going to do a 5-minute version of it here, but go read the Romantic Manifesto. That's like asking, why should someone invest time and effort into a romantic relationship? Now, I know there's some incels and men going their own way and all kind of weird stuff out there of people who don't want to have romantic relationships, but they can't and won't have a completely fulfilled life. Right? Romantic love is part of life. Art is at least as much so. So art projects back to you your values. It concretizes you. It gives you a sense of wholeness, of completeness, of understanding. I'm putting aside the pedagogical value of art, and there is one. It stylizes your consciousness. It makes you a better thinker. It makes you a better actor in reality because it gives you moral models to follow. It has that pedagogical value, but the essential thing is the feeling you get when experiencing great art. It's a fact. Oh, remind me. I want to recommend 2 shows and mention maybe this is a cultural phenomenon. I don't know, but it is interesting. So it's really, really, really important. And by the way, if you're really interested in that, I suggest listening to Leonard Peikoff's course on 8th grade plays, but also his talk on Greece that we mentioned earlier, because he talks about the importance of art there and why Greek culture was superior because of its art. Now, I didn't finish Jim's question earlier. The thing that we lack more than anything in the 21st century is an appreciation for aesthetics, is appreciation for heroes, It's an appreciation for beauty. It's an appreciation for a noble, great life, which art, concretizes for us. We are poor. We might be wealthy, as Jonathan and I discussed earlier, materially, but we are poor spiritually. We're poorer than we were 200 years ago spiritually, poorer than we were 150 years ago. The 19th century was a rich, probably second only to Greece and maybe to the Renaissance, in culture, in plays and novels and painting and sculpture and music, romantic music, and all of this stuff. It was the greatest, I think, was the greatest era of art in all of human history, the 19th century. And where are we today? We have none of that. Now we can go visit museums, but we have none of that. So we are so poor. It's hard to concretize how poor we are. You know, our streets are not lined with beautiful sculptures. Our streets are lined with mangled metal, which people pretend is sculpture, but is actually a reflection of a soul that is disintegrated, clueless, lost, and just disgusting. So it's crucial that you invest time and effort into cultivating taste in art, because you're not being egoistic if you're not. And read the Romantic Manifesto. Your opinion on secondhand smoke, please. Are my rights being infringed when I have to breathe it, or do smokers have the right to pollute the air? My best of my knowledge, it's secondhand smoke is bogus. The amount of secondhand smoke you would get if you were just casually engaged with it clearly is not going to affect your health. If you're intensely in it constantly over time, yes, maybe it has bad health effects. But why are you doing that? That should be a choice you have. If smokers are smoking outdoors, it has no impact on you. If you enter a restaurant where everybody's smoking, don't enter the restaurant. That's easy, right? If your spouse smokes in the house, stop her, right? So control your environment. Leave people alone to control theirs. In most environments, secondhand smoke is not enough a pollutant, a threat to your health to justify banning it. And in the context of closed rooms like restaurants should have a sign, we allow smoking, and you can decide whether to go there or not. You get to choose. I wouldn't go. I hate the smell. Now that we have smoke-free everything, I love it, right? I mean, airplanes used to stink. Rent-a-cars used to stink. Hotel rooms used to stink. Restaurants used to stink. So it's wonderful. But if somebody wants an airplane that smokes with smoking, fine, cool for them. I just won't go on it. All right, Trump flirted with buying Greenland. No, he didn't. You can't buy something that's not for sale. Seems like a good idea. It has licenses for mining gold, iron, zinc. Yeah, it's an amazing place in terms of rare metals and natural resources. But you know what? Denmark has sovereignty over Greenland. Do we really want to go to war with Denmark? And why can't we just trade with Denmark? Why does America have to own Greenland? America doesn't own resources. You got to get out of this collectivistic mode of thinking. It doesn't matter what resources America owns. Private companies should own all that. You should encourage private enterprise to go to Greenland and mine for these things. And it's under the sovereignty of Denmark, which is a free country that has the rule of law, property rights, and we can trade with them. So why do we, America, need to own Greenland? I mean, as far as I can remember, and maybe I'm wrong, at least Leonard Peikoff, I'm not sure if Ayn Rand, were against the Jefferson, what do you call it, the Louisiana purchase. It's not the role of government to buy land. The role of government to protect our property rights. We don't buy land. Government shouldn't own land. Remember, the definition of capitalism is a system in which all land is privately owned. So no, I don't think Trump should have bought Greenland. I don't think America should buy Greenland. I think we should, to the extent they have natural resources, we should trade with Denmark and benefit from win-win, benefit from their natural resources. By the way, natural resources don't make you rich. Spain learned that because it controlled all of Latin America, all of Central America, huge gold reserves, and yet they got poorer. And France and England got rich because France and England had relatively free markets. All the gold flowed to freedom and emptied the Spanish coffers. Japan has no natural resources, and it's a rich economy. So, yeah. For public companies, there's government regulations like SOX. SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, I assume. Affirmative action justified given that ownership is public and management is different. No, absolutely not. Public only means lots of people, not the public, this mystical collective that lives out there and that owns stuff. No, public just means a bunch of people. I might own some stock. Jim might own different stock. Jonathan owns completely different stock. Those companies we own a piece of. The public companies in the sense that we can go into the marketplace and buy a stake in them. Government has no business in any of that. You could argue exchanges might be motivated to regulate and as they always have done, in a sense that if you list on my exchange and I want a lot of trading, you have to follow these rules and these regulations in order to be listed on my exchange. And I am protecting shareholders, and that's how I create a place in which people are happy to come and buy and sell. But government has no business there. There are no individual rights being protected. And there's no such thing as public ownership. And certainly public companies are not public. It's a terrible word. It's owned by many people who can buy and sell in markets. Public markets are not good either because you get that public word in it. It's treated mystically as if it's an entity. Why is Musk taking government money not the same as Air Wright taking government money if that you're taking back what was originally yours and government took? Because an important element in that is that you're arguing against the government giving the money away. If you are for the government giving the money away, you have no right to it, even if it's your own money being returned to you, because you're also advocating for money being taken away from other people. It's only because you're fighting to eliminate the entire system that you have a right to get your money back. But that doesn't include, and again, I encourage you to read Ayn Rand's essay on scholarships, where she talks about this at length. Highly recommend the historical novels of Mary Renault. I think I've read some of them. They're really good. She wrote a number of novels that take place in ancient Athens. Yes, they do. Really great if you want to take a trip back in time. Yeah, they really were enjoyable. I don't think, I've read one or two. But yeah, I second the recommendation of Mary Renault. I've actually got some of her books. I was going to look backwards, but that's California. That's not here. In California, my bookshelf, I have a few of Mary Renault's books. All right, a last question has to be a question about Trump, as always. If Trump loses this election, is it possible for him to run again in 2024? Yes, legally, absolutely, it's possible. Should we just get Trump out of our system? Yes, please. Yes, he can run again in 2024, but he won't. He will lose if he does. The Republicans, if he loses this time, he is a loser. And he's not Nixon who can make a comeback. He will not be able to make a comeback, I don't believe. But it also depends on how badly he loses. If he loses, he'll also be quite a bit older in 4 years, right? So I just don't think I don't think that's a risk we should take. And in terms of getting him out of our system, him and the entire set of ideas that animate him, we need to get Bannon and his ilk out of our system and spin them out into their own nationalist party, political party, and start over again. Republican Party is going to have a fight. There's going to be a fight. If Trump loses, and I still think he will, if Trump loses the next 4 years, maybe even the next 2 years, will be a massive battle within the Republican Party for its soul and for its future. And this would be a time to get involved in politics. This would be a time for those of you interested in politics to be involved in them, to try to support the better elements in the Republican Party, who are not the Trump elements, the better free market elements that are out there, and to reject the Josh Hawley, Tucker Carlson, anti-capitalist, pro the common good in the reading of the Constitution. Everything, I talked about with the Brad Thompson when he was on the show. That part of the Republican Party, what is it? Front porch conservatism. There's millions of different names for it. But we need to reject that form of right. And the battle is going to be within the Republican Party. And I think it's a good time for objectivists and other freedom-loving people to get involved. We could have an impact, and we could shape the future of this party over the next 2 to 4 years. And it's going to determine the fate of this country, because it will determine whether the Republican Party is an actual opposition party to the Democrats, whether they field decent candidates in the future, or whether it's just a question of which authoritarian is going to take over. So I think in that sense, the battle within the Republican Party over the next 4 years is going to be crucial. And I encourage everybody to get involved and to get engaged and to participate in it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys, for the support. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, as always.
Thanks for.
Thanks, everybody out there, for your support. Thanks to the Super Chatters. Please don't forget to like the show before you leave. We should have well over 100 likes there. And don't forget to share it. Don't forget to support the show like these guys do on a monthly basis at yaronbrookshow.com/support. You can do anything, anywhere on there from $2 a month to $500 a month. I have my preference between those two. I think you can guess which one, but I thank you no matter what you do, at what level you support the show. And we'll be back on Tuesday with the $1,000 match. And then on Thursday with another Q&A. And we'll slowly figure out what our Puerto Rican schedule is going to be. Thanks, guys.
Okay,
Bye, everybody.